Good Thursday, everyone. Welcome to the Volquest.com mailbag podcast presented by Blue Water Climate Control with Austin Price and Rob Lewis. I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. And don't forget about our friends at Blue Water Climate Control for all your heating and air HVAC needs. Blue Water Climate Control can take care of you. As we know, everybody's air conditioning unit is being taxed this week with all the heat that's there. We know that heat's not going away. So you want to make sure your air conditioning unit is running smoothly and operating the way it should. So if you need a tune-up, get a tune-up. If you need some repair work, they can get to you. They can take care of it. They're going to send a repairman out to do the job the right way the first time. Whatever your needs are, Blue Water Climate Control is going to take care of you. Give them a call at 865-299-2290 or check them out online at bluewaterclimatecontrol.com. All right, we've got plenty of questions to get to in the mailbag podcast, and so we'll get started right out of the gate. How rare is it in your profession to have something as big as the OU in Texas joining the SEC stay quiet for as long as it did? I'd say it's next to impossible these days that something like that happens, that there's so much work going on behind the scenes that it stays that quiet. I think part of that, personally, COVID probably helped it because there wasn't face-to-face meetings in a hotel room somewhere for somebody to bump into something and you could make sure nobody knew what was going on. I mean, you can limit the number of people who had access to stuff. So I think that helped. And obviously, you had a bunch of people or a handful of people involved that didn't want anybody to know and made sure nobody knew. But it is rare for sure in this day and age that something has been in the works for that long and it doesn't get out.
I agree. I mean, it never happens. I mean, like, especially that length of time. I mean, I've seen stuff stay quiet for days, maybe even a couple of weeks, but to stay quiet, for as long as they've been working on this, I mean, kudos to everybody involved that kept it quiet, because you just don't see it happen at all.
Well, and I think,
that was
go ahead, Rob.
I was just going to say that was my very first reaction. I can't believe they kept this quiet.
Well, and I think for Oklahoma and Texas, there was plenty of justification for doing that because there's so much money on the line. And, I'm not sure how many people Sankey told even in his own office. Nobody in the league, I don't think, knew anything for a long time on that. So small number of people involved. And again, nobody was traveling around the world and around the country seeing each other, bumping into each other because there was so much, reduced travel. Everything could be handled, via Zoom calls and things like that, which probably helped that out a good bit as well.
And I would add this too: if the presidents were the kind of people who was involved, they don't deal with sports media in a normal basis like an athletic director would. So I think they're very far removed from our world, as opposed to, I mean, not that Philip Fulmer would have spilled the beans, but I'm saying we all have dealt with Coach Fulmer in the past, and that's the same way at every SEC school in the league. So I think that was another reason it was able to stay so closed.
Yep, I agree with that. Because there's not the media tie-in to those guys for sure. Because there's not people covering universities on a daily basis as a beat, in a non-athletic world. All right, onward we go. If you're Rodney Garner, what does your recruiting pitch sound like? Not just to Walter Nolan, but to all top flight recruits. We know he's the ace on the staff. AP, what's the recruiting pitch sound like?
Well, I think it depends on each kid. I mean, I think they have to be tailored to each kid, because that's, good recruiters don't come with the same pitch to every kid they come in contact with. They make it different, and make it more tailored to each individual player. So, the overall, I guess, feel would be, come here, and the same pitch that, has been said around here a lot the last, 10 or 12 years is opportunity. Come be the class that helps change it. And if you're Rodney Garner, you're talking to a defensive lineman, you're specifically talking about all the guys that you've developed and put in the National Football League. Sure, there are the Derek Browns of the world that were highly coveted coming out of high school. But there are also ones that he coached that are playing in the NFL that were not, top 50 players coming out of high school. And he did a nice job of developing them. So, track record and development is something I think he would preach to defensive linemen.
Yeah, and I think the other thing too, and Rob, you're not in this business for 30 years if your recruiting pitch is a bunch of just hollow talk. I think there's a lot of honesty in terms of hey, this is what it's like for me. You can call anybody you want to that's played for me. Here's how it is. You need to know what you're getting into. A little bit like what Rick does in basketball recruiting. I mean, I think there's a real honesty to his pitch as well, particularly as he's gotten older in his recruiting pitch. I think there's a lot about development and, hey, here's the expectations if you come play for me. And I think
Well,
that's
and
what it's done.
I mean, how many high school coaches in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, does he have long-standing relationships with that can serve as references to not just kids that they may be coaching, but maybe Rodney's recruiting. Maybe the one high school coach has buddies he's buddies with another high school coach at a different school and the coach picks up the phone and calls and asks about Rodney. I mean, he's got a legitimate reputation that has been built up by being honest and forthright over 30 years and taking care of kids. I mean, you can't go. I mean, how many places does he go back to that he's recruited a kid before in the state of Georgia where he's dealing with this, not just the same coach, but maybe the same guidance counselor, maybe the same assistant principal, just the kind of contacts and relationships he has with people like that. I bet I'd be interested. That'd make a good documentary. To really, I mean, and that's something that matters in recruiting.
Yeah. All right, on to the next one. Here we go. Could you ever envision a scenario where the SEC is a dominant league for football and another league like the ACC becomes dominant in basketball, thus leading to schools participating in two differing leagues for differing sports? Or will the dollars generated by the SEC make it hard for other leagues not named the Big Ten to compete in all sports? You have Notre Dame, which competes in, as an independent, and, then they compete in the ACC. They've done that. But the direction we're going here, the dollars that are involved here, the ACC is not going to, or the SEC is not going to say, hey, you can be a football only member in this league and then you can go play another sport somewhere else. I don't think I don't see that scenario in the changing landscape of college athletics at all.
I agree.
Yeah.
I mean, Kentucky's not going to turn down that SEC check I mean, the basketball revenue is never going to match the football revenue. And unless it changes where the NCAA tournament is not controlled and run by the NCAA. I mean, if the national champion is decided, and it's not under the NCAA banner because they get all that revenue from CBS. I mean, that pretty much sustains that whole organization. As long as that's the case, basketball's never going to come close to football and generating paychecks.
Yeah, it's just not like, joining a local country club and, joining the social membership and not the golf side or whatever. I mean, like, to me, you're either all in or all out.
Yeah, if you're taking the football check, all your sports are playing in this league. I mean, that's the way that's going to be. And that's I just don't see any difference in any scenario where it's anything other than that moving forward. All right, Rob, today's draft day for the NBA draft. Iron Vol wants to know a final prediction. What time, what pick Jaden and Keon go tonight? If you pick the team and the pick in the draft right for one, AP will pay your speeding tickets for the next 15 years. Obviously, listen to the Monday podcast or the Tuesday podcast. All right, here we go, Rob. You're on the spot here. What do you got? You got Keon going to who, where?
Let me see the draft order to see who picks where. And
we need some Jeopardy music going. You want to whistle that, AP?
We don't have that kind of time, Rob.
Got it right here.
Here we go.
I think I would go Keon number 12 to the Spurs. Jaden 25 to the Clippers. Right. I think Keon goes somewhere between 10 and 15. I think Jalen goes somewhere around 25 to 30. That's my prediction.
All right, there you go. You got your team, you got your selection, got a window when they're going to go. And we'll see what happens with those two guys as their names get called in the NBA draft coming up later tonight. You have mentioned in the past that Tennessee has had trouble keeping secrets and that people that are involved in the inner workings of the Tennessee football program like to talk. Why do you think that is? What is the incentive of telling a media member what's going on behind the scenes of a coaching search, football program, etc.? Anybody want to jump on this one first?
I think people talk everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think Tennessee's unique in that regard at all.
Well, and I think, I think the other thing too, AP, is for Tennessee and just particularly in some coaching searches, there've been some searches where a lot of people, probably too many people, have known what's going on, which creates, more people talking, because, it's one of those deals where somebody hears something and calls a friend and tells something, and all of a sudden it's off and running. The other thing too is, as a media member, you're open to have, and you should have relationships, and those relationships should land you some information. Otherwise, you haven't done a good job developing relationships.
No doubt. I mean, it's, sometimes, you can be too close and, in covering recruiting, because, coaches, not just the current staff or the previous staff, or it's basically all of them, they change opinions a lot. And so sometimes you ride the wave. Tennessee decides to go after player X, and then a week later they've kind of pulled back. So like information changes. So it feels like you're all over the map, when in reality you're getting stuff in such real time. Same thing with, coaching searches. I mean, think about how much, of the wave you can ride, if you're kind of have a good in with, the right person on the coaching search. I mean, you can ride the wave, and it'll take you for a ride.
And sometimes too, there's some people directly involved in the search that want some information out there because it helps them. I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, I think one of the mistakes John Curry made, in the search that ultimately led to him losing his job out of the gate was, he tried to use some of the Gruden stuff as a smokescreen, to go work a search, as opposed to putting that to bed. There have been other coaching searches where guys have put stuff, they've used the media member to put stuff to bed so that it helps them in their coaching search and it doesn't become a problem. So there's a variety of reasons, but I'm with Rob. I think if you look, and that's the shocking part of the OU Texas thing, is that nobody talked, because that's very different than how
until it leaked out at SEC Media Day.
Right. Which until somebody was ready for it to be out, it stayed quiet, which is something that, and obviously they leaked it to a couple of media outlets to, hey, let's get this out there because now's the time to get it out there. So, I'm with Rob. I just think most places there are people talking. I don't think a ton of people. And the other thing too, at Tennessee, I mean, this beat's covered hard. There are a lot of people digging. There are a lot of people looking for information. There are a lot of people talking to a lot of people. So that's another part of it as well. If you had to speculate, do you think Heupel would lean more on the run game if no quarterback shows the ability to do anything other than throw the occasional deep ball? Kentucky had success doing that. We can't have a stubborn coach trying to bring his system. He has to play to his strengths. I think one of the biggest misnomers in Josh Heupel's offense is that he doesn't run the ball. I think if you look at their balance, Rob, at Central Florida, they ran the ball more than anybody would think that they run the ball. But he's going to find a quarterback out of his room that's going to be able to throw it the way he wants to throw it. Will they run their perfect system, the full complement system? I don't know that, but they're not going to have a running back playing quarterback and run it, 54 times a game, because they're going to find a quarterback who can do enough of what they want to do offensively to throw the football.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think that's kind of a misnomer with a lot of these spread offenses, so to speak. Is, I mean, like Ole Miss ran the football quite a bit more than they passed it last year. I'm not saying that it's the same offense, but I mean, you've got to be able to do both. I mean, just because you hurry up and you like to run a lot of plays does not mean that the run game is not a big part of what you do.
Yep, I agree with that. All right, AP, to you on a recruiting question here. Do you think it will ultimately be hard to sign top defensive recruits playing this style of offense long term, or does winning solve that? Defensive recruiting has been brutal to watch so far, minus a bright spot here or there. I get there's no film and the investigation, but obviously we need the most help on defense. Where do you see the defensive board now? Where could you see it going this year? What could help us push us up in the fall with some defensive talent specifically? What do you make of where they are defensively?
Well, I do think winning helps. I mean, I think that, look, Ole Miss, Alabama, LSU, all those scored a lot of points. Now, two of those three are a little bit different than the other, but like that's just kind of where the game's going. We'll be interested to see how much, Georgia's offense continues to evolve, because you look at how Nick has evolved at Alabama, and obviously, what LSU's trying to do and kind of recreate the magic of 2 years ago. This they want to go up tempo. They want to score points. They want to go, somewhat fast. So the defense is naturally going to not be as good. They're going to give up more points. I think it's more patience than anything else. We'll see, what Tennessee tries to do. You look at, a couple of guys that I think that are, somebody that Tennessee's going to take a swing at over the next, month or two. Sean Washington, former LSU defensive tackle commit, someone Tennessee's going to, take a swing at and see if they can get in play. There have at least been some conversations there. Former Auburn corner commit, Jarrell Stinson, same thing. Vanderbilt commitment, Caleb Coley is another one. Kentucky commit, kid out of Michigan that Tim Banks knows really well, who was down here for camp back in June, Jeremiah Caldwell. Someone else who is a safety that Tennessee will take a look at. So Tennessee's going to keep swinging. If they don't land any of those guys, especially at the corner board, then Tennessee will just do what they did this time and go back to the transfer portal. I think there's some really quality bodies out there at some of the higher end programs that are just behind the elite of elite that can play. They just can't get on the field, that want to play and may look to leave.
Well, and as a result of that, I mean, Tennessee's this past recruiting class that was, pretty much in place when Josh Heupel got here. Of course, they lost some of that. That defensive class, Rob, could be a really good defensive class, depending on how Muhan plays, depending on how Williams plays at linebacker, the two corners that they got, the two defensive linemen that they got. If those guys who have multiple years of eligibility can play, which you think they can as a transfer, then that's a pretty good looking recruiting class. And I do think, along with what Austin's saying, I do think you'll see Tennessee on the defensive transfer board or in the portal looking for defensive players again a year from now, because I think if you can find them with multiple years of eligibility, I do think there's a help there, because I like what they got done defensively with the transfers this year.
I mean, if those guys that you rattled off, if they're just average SEC players, I mean, it was a really good recruiting class, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, with everything that you had going on, the turmoil, the changeover, and everything else, to add those guys, if you get major, or some significant contributions out of those guys, not just this year, but in years to come, it's a really good haul in defensive recruiting. And I know people want to know about the high school board. You can't live, solely off transfers, but as you get established, Austin, the transfer world may help you. And I mean, Tennessee's got a chance to help themselves, be a much better defense than they were in the spring because of what has arrived since spring practice on the defensive side of the ball.
Much like Mississippi State and Kansas State used to live in the JUCO ranks for everything they did. And much like certain schools have tried to retool a position through the JUCO ranks, the new way to do that is going to be through the transfer portal. And so, I think that's something that people are going to do. If you're thin at a particular position, you'll see schools hit the transfer portal hard at that position, trying to retool what they have. And so, for a team like Tennessee, who's trying to, make up a lot of ground fast, that's the best way to go about it. Especially if you can bring in guys that, were highly thought of coming out of high school and or have made some type of impact early on in their college career.
Is there a possibility that the JUCO offensive tackle could crack the starting lineup, or at least the two deep? Is he that highly regarded? Similarly, do you expect all the defensive transfers to crack the two deep, especially the two defensive linemen, Muhan, and the two defensive backs? Just spoke about the defensive guys. I don't know. I've not seen the offensive line, the JUCO offensive tackle. I don't know what he can and can't do.
I don't see there's any way that he starts. I would give that
Right.
1% chance of happening.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Two deep, I'll give him a 30% chance of cracking the two deep. I just think he's more project than he is anything else, in my opinion. With some potential really high upside, but I still think project to begin with. As far as those defensive guys, Brent, I'm not sure about Apache Muhan. I think that he's got a certain skill set, but I'm not sure he cracks the two deep. Be interested to see what either Kamal Haddon and or Brandon Turnage could do at corner. Jawan Mitchell is going to make the two deep. I think the defensive lineman Tremblay, Deshaun Terry, they're in the two deep. But I won't say all of them are going to be in the two deep. Most.
Yeah, I'd say most of them will. The thing with the offensive tackle is there's enough flexibility on that offensive line of sliding people from guard to tackle that you're getting your best five on the field, and that might not be just plugging in the guy in the two deep there. It might be sliding somebody, from center out to tackle, because that makes you the better five to get your best five guys on the field. Rob, hoops to you. Will the expansion force the SEC to get rid of the SEC tournament? Seems like a 16, 18, possibly even 20 team tournament is too much. Would the SEC basketball tournament go away with expansion?
No, I think you'd see it be conducted like the baseball tournament is. Just some teams wouldn't make it.
Yeah, I think there's money involved in the basketball tournament, so you're gonna do that.
There's no chance they're eliminating the SEC tournament.
But you're not going to have everybody make it, so you do like what you're talking about.
It won't be a 24 team field. It'll be just, like I said, just like baseball. Top 12 or 14 or 16 or whatever make it.
All right, minus Rodney Garner, who's the best position coach on the football team?
I don't think we know yet. We only went through spring, and really, I guess if you're going off, previous track record, I kind of like what Glenn Ellerby does on the offensive line.
Yeah, look at. I think you got to throw Willie Martinez in there too as a developer of talent. But Rodney and Willie are the two easiest names to say because they have the SEC experience, they have the track record. If you followed SEC football, you know about those guys. I want to see what Alex Golesh could do, Rob, because I didn't watch a lot of Iowa State football to figure out what they were doing there. I see Glenn Ellerby's resume, but I can't tell you what year was Glenn Ellerby's best offensive line. Give me the four players Glenn Ellerby's really developed. I can give you Willie Martinez 5 or 6 names because some of them came directly from here when he coached here. And so I think you got to see what these guys look like just to say this guy's the best, this guy's the second best. Based on the knowledge that you have, Willie and Rodney, because they're both experienced in the league, and you can rattle off a bunch of players they've coached and developed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a question we can answer maybe in December with some authority as opposed to right now.
I'll say this: there better be some guys on the staff that can develop some players, because I think that's to get back where you want to go. You have to evaluate guys who play above their recruiting ranking, and you have to help them develop above their recruiting ranking, because right now it's hard to go in and win a lot of head-to-head battles with the top teams you're trying to catch in this league. So we'll see what their development looks like in year one and beyond. Can you envision any current SEC schools being told to look around should the power brokers in college athletics decide they want one super conference? If it's all about money, I can't imagine Vanderbilt or the Mississippi schools being included. And with that being said, let's pretend there's eventually one super conference of 24 to 32 schools. Does Tennessee get asked to join? And if so, is it purely because of the TV revenue that they generate? I don't think we're close to a 32 team type super conference deal. I could be wrong, but I don't see that happening. 2, I don't see the SEC telling somebody to go away. Now,
I'm not going to pretend to know, however, don't you imagine there's some pretty, ironclad language in the contracts that these schools have or in the SEC charter about what is grounds for it being expelled from the league, so to speak? I bet it's some pretty straightforward language in there that's not just something you can decide to do in Destin.
Yeah, I don't think you'd come into the room and go, all right, we're voting somebody out. Okay, we're we're kicking them off the island here. It's a game of Survivor. AP, who's out now? If in the as conference expands, if somebody doesn't compete the way they need to compete, if they're not financially invested in competing and they're just riding coattails, then maybe that's a conversation. But I don't think that they're sitting around going, all right, who do we kick out of this league? If that's been that's never been the conversation in this conference, and I don't see that generating in the next bid anyway, with the expansion and everything going on.
Yeah, I agree. Especially, I mean, everybody, like the Mississippi schools, like I don't think either one of those is getting looked at and said, I mean, and Vanderbilt's too good in other sports. I get football drives the train, but you also have to look at the totality, I think, of what else they bring, and they do bring the we're smart angle. They do bring quality play in a couple other sports, and so I just think you would add teams around the Vanderbilts and Mississippi schools.
Here's what I think is more likely. And I also think this is 10, 15, 20 years down the road. I mean, I don't think it's imminent. If you're going to do something like that to create a super conference, I think it's more likely that the SEC just disbands and there's a new entity formed where all these schools come together.
Yeah, I could see that. Here's the other thing too. I'll say this about the Mississippi schools from a financial standpoint and facility standpoint. Don't sell those two schools short on kind of the money they have and where they are. I mean, they're not what you think if you've been around those places. I mean, they have better baseball facilities than Tennessee and some other places. I mean, they're not this poor, desolate place that everybody wants it to make it out to be.
It's not huge, but Ole Miss may have the nicest basketball arena in the league, just in terms of ambiance and bells and whistles. I mean, it's sharp.
Yeah, absolutely, it is. All right, please read, don't laugh, as we run out of time here. I always like this. Compare the 2013 Auburn team that won the SEC to the 21 Vols. Look, I'm not saying we're going to win the going to the national championship game or win the SEC, but the comparisons are at least interesting and fun. The 2013 Auburn team went 11-1 in the regular season, won the SEC, but the year before, in 2012, they were 3-9 and went 0-8 in the SEC. Chiswick fired, brought in a new offensive-minded coach. 2013 was year one for Gus Malzahn after firing defensive-minded Gene Chiswick. No proven quarterback coming in to 2013. Nick Marshall won the job at fall camp. Wasn't even on the roster in 2012. There was some talent on the roster, but it wasn't loaded. The following year, only 4 players were taken in the NFL draft. Not one single coach was retained from the previous staff. In other words, it was the first year for all those coaches, including Rodney Garner. I think that's a pretty talented Auburn team. I think this too. I think Gus Malzahn surprised the SEC. A lot of people had to try. It took a year for a lot of people to catch up to what he was doing offensively. I think a lot of people are prepared for spread offenses now, where they weren't prepared for that kind of up-tempo spread stuff that he brought into the league in that first year. I think the West took the West a year or two to figure out what they were doing, and I think because of that, it helped Auburn have success right out of the gate. I'm not saying Tennessee can't have success, but I think everybody's more accustomed to stopping the spread attack now than they were when Gus Malzahn came into this league. All right, break down what a football player's average day looks like during fall camp. How does it change once the season starts? With the new coaching staff and the NIL, how much more or less coverage do you think we will get this fall? I don't think you're going to get any less coverage. I think you may get a little bit more in fall camp in terms of access to practice. What does the day look like until you start classes? It's about football all the time. Once you start classes, you jump into the 20-hour rule, and then it changes dramatically. So that's what's going on there. Austin, what's the deal with the Brown kid from Milan moving his commitment date back? You've long said the longer the 22 in-state kids wait to make decisions, the better it is for Tennessee.
I mean, unless something's changed, and I don't think anything's changed, I just don't see any way Anthony Brown picks Tennessee. I think he just pushed it back. I don't think it had to do with, trying to give Tennessee more time.
Are they still looking at Perry and Josephs as the lone linebackers we're going hard after? Who are the defensive ends on the board? And does that mean because Browns pushes back, Tennessee's going to make any kind of run at Jalen Lewis?
No, I don't think that. I don't see Tennessee making a run at Jalen Lewis. I think, but those kids will go to Arkansas. As far as Joseph's, that to me is a Kentucky, Michigan, Tennessee battle. And then I think defensive ends kind of like corner. I think it's something where Tennessee will get into the season, see who emerges, see who maybe they can get back in on. I named some guys earlier. A couple of them were defensive linemen that I think Tennessee will take a swing at over the next 6 weeks or so.
Rob, as of today, who's the staff trying to schedule official visits with in basketball this fall? Staff any less confidence on Wallace since the Kentucky offer and him scheduling an official visit to Lexington?
Visits, they want everybody back that came in June. Guys that didn't come in June, Johan Traor, Ernest Uday, and Julian Phillips, who they just recently offered. As far as the case on Wallace in Kentucky, I'm not saying that Tennessee's not confident, but it's pretty basic common sense, and it stands to reason. When you go from being the only school a kid has taken an official visit to him taking an official visit to another school, then that changes the equation, especially when that school is Kentucky, one of the top 3 programs in the history of the sport. So yeah, it's gonna be a recruiting battle. This kid's a top 10 talent. I mean, I don't know why anybody would think it's gonna be a laydown.
Yeah, no, and I mean, once other people get involved, he starts, like you say. I mean, it becomes a straight up recruiting battle, which is what that one is definitely going to be. All right, final question: what are some of the biggest recruiting misses by Tennessee staff over the last 10 years? Guys that Tennessee should have recruited harder or came in second in recruiting. Orlando Brown at Oklahoma, which Tennessee cut loose.
That remains an all-timer, by the way.
Jacob Phillips at LSU comes to mind. Keyshawn Vaughn at Vandy. Dotson at A&M. Nate Gillum at Wake Forest. What are some biggest ones for you guys?
Jacoby Stevens?
Yeah, I mean, Keyshawn Vaughn, I mean, he went to Illinois before coming back to Vandy. So it's not like, that was a little different. I mean, yeah, he ends up being a really good, solid running back. I mean, he hit the nail on the head with some of them. You could go with a lot of misses. I mean, like, Tennessee, and they lost out on T. Higgins. They never were a factor for Amari Rogers, even though all the Vol fans, Amari's just a take to get T. Never was a take to get T. Amari's good. Look at him, man. I mean, he's just again, I've said this before, of all the kids I've covered, the hardest working kid I've ever covered.
He's a better guy, better player than I thought he would be. I mean, I give him full credit. I didn't know him well enough, didn't cover him to know a lot. He is because of his work ethic, he's a guy who's going to play the game for a long time.
You look at it, Brent, and there's so many in-state guys, but even like a guy like Tate Ratledge, like, grandmother's diehard Lady Vol fan, dad's a diehard Vol fan, peels the sticker off the truck. Like Tennessee, that's why I've continued to say that Addison Nichols is so important, because, Tennessee's got to stop losing those top players.
Yeah, and there's some other guys. I mean, look, Sam Howell. What does this program look like if Sam Howell is your quarterback? I mean, I know we're going out of state here, but that's a guy. I'm not saying they would have absolutely landed him, Austin, but you talked to him. They would have been in the big time hunt if Tennessee would have pursued him. And obviously the Trevor Lawrence story has been discussed a gazillion times, and what a quarterback means. Ty Simpson, that's not Josh Heupel's fault. It's the timing of things that didn't work. We'll see. How that affects Tennessee long term down the road. I mean, you could just name a bunch of those, and that's just. I mean, that's when you talk about what's been the biggest issue for Tennessee. That's been it, and part of the reason why they haven't been able to recruit as well as they need to is some of it's bad evaluation, Rob. Some of it's kids not interested in Tennessee because they're not winning. They haven't won enough, and some of it is coaching staff turnover and their timing's been off.
I mean, to me, this goes back. You've not played in Atlanta in 14 years.
Yeah, that's probably the best way. Probably the best way to say it is you haven't been there in 14 years, and that changes the outlook of where people think that you are, and what people think who you are at this at this point in time. So that's going to do it for this edition of the Blue Water Climate Control Mailbag Podcast. For Austin Price and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Thanks for joining us. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Quick shout out and quick best wishes to a couple of guys dealing with a couple of health things. Former Vol defensive line coach Dan Brooks, continued recovery, my friend, and to Ray Hand as well, continued recovery, as both those guys have had to deal with a few things the last few days. So thoughts and prayers continue to be with those guys moving forward. But that does it for this edition of the podcast. For Austin Price and Rob Lewis, I'm Brent Hubbs. Have a great rest of your Thursday, everybody.